Hey everyone, today I'm going to talk about industrialization in the late 1800s. If we go back to the early 1800s, before the Civil War, the United States went through the Market Revolution, which was the first industrial revolution in the United States. They moved away from small, family-owned farms and trading goods to a larger market economy with factories and unified transportation systems. Well, in the late 1800s, after the Civil War, we get the second industrial revolution, which was even bigger and led to more change. One of the biggest things that stimulated the economy and led to this revolution was the construction of new railroad lines. In 1865, at the end of the Civil War, there were only 35,000 miles of track, but by 1900, there were about 193,000 miles. The new railroad lines made the Industrial Revolution possible because now they can transfer new materials to the factories or new crops, and the goods they made can be shipped all across the United States. The U.S. had an abundance of natural resources like coal, iron ore, timber, and oil. Now that railroads expand across the United States, they can ship these raw materials to places where they can make something with it and sell it. Also, the US had a ton of people ready to work in the factories or move out to the west to farm the new land. There was also an increase in immigration around this time, leading to more workers as well. Plus, the increase in population means there is also an increase in the demand for goods. More people means more products that you can sell. The government also began to get rid of this idea of laissez-faire and became more involved in the economy by passing higher tariffs. We're going to talk more about the government's role either in another video or in class, so stay tuned for that one. The new inventions at the time also helped lead to more industrial development. The Bessemer process allowed people to make steel at a cheaper price. I'm not going to go into the science behind it, mostly because I don't know the science behind it, and you can save that for your science teacher, but I think it was the idea of blowing cold air on really hot iron that led to the creation of steel, which was stronger than just iron. So basically, steel is stronger. This Bessemer process leads to stronger. They began to make steel in large quantities since iron ore was easy to find in the United States, and the steel was used for all kinds of things during this time period, like railroad tracks and even skyscrapers. They also invented the telephone and the typewriter around this time, which would help with more business development. And they also began to change their marketing techniques. After the Civil War, they began to have department stores like Macy's, and some companies like Sears would even mail catalogs to people's homes where they could look through it and choose what they wanted to buy. And then those goods would be shipped out to you. But the biggest change was that the Industrial Revolution led to an increase in the number of men becoming entrepreneurs or businessmen. For the Civil War, most wealthy or respectable men went into politics to make a name for themselves or to impact their country. But after the war, people who may have gone into politics are now more focused on making a profit. They saw the Industrial Revolution as an opportunity and used this new economy to their advantage. There are a couple people that I want you to know more about. The first one is Cornelius Vanderbilt. He made a huge profit off his railroad lines. Some people called him and the others that we're going to discuss in a minute robber barons because they cheated the system to make more money. For example, railroad lines would often lower prices on lines where there was competition, but then raise the price super high on a railroad line where it was the people's only option to travel, even if it was a smaller distance. Or they offered rebates or kickbacks to large companies that promised to ship on their lines. Another person who became extremely wealthy at this time period is Andrew Carnegie. By 1900, he was producing about a quarter of the country's steel, and just imagine how much money he was making because steel was used for tons of things being built at this time. Carnegie was a little different than Vanderbilt in that he didn't believe in monopolies and gave a lot of his money away later in life, but not everything was perfect in his company either. If you remember, we talked more about him in class when we looked at the Homestead Strike that occurred under Henry Frick and his steel mill in Pennsylvania. John G. Rockefeller is another person who gained a monopoly off the oil industry. In 1870, he created the Standard Oil Company, and just 7 years later, he controlled 95% of the oil refineries in the United States. What made it even worse was that Rockefeller didn't exactly have very good ethics. He was willing to be a ruthless robber baron in order to make a profit. For example, he would do things like drop his prices really low in a town to make the other oil companies have to do the same, which would make them go bankrupt because they weren't making enough money. And then when he bought out their oil company, he would raise the prices back up again. He also worked with the railroad lines to earn rebates or created trusts, which was another form of a monopoly. Carnegie even once called Rockefeller Rockefeller instead of Rockefeller because he disagreed with his tactics so much. And J.P. Morgan was the most influential banker of this time. He didn't think that the idea of someone with money was dangerous and used this influence to make him become one of the wealthiest men in America at the time. All these ruthless business tactics led to the idea of social Darwinism, which was the idea that the rich are rich because they work the hardest and deserve it, or the idea of survival of the fittest. Some of these new millionaires and billionaires, like Andrew Carnegie, started off poor and worked their way to the top, and they didn't understand why the others couldn't do the same. They thought if you were poor, it was because of something you were doing or not doing. Even Andrew Carnegie, who didn't think monopolies were a good thing, thought the rich should be the ones in charge of the money and not the poor. Basically, since he was rich, he thought it proved that he was smarter than everyone else, especially people who didn't have a lot of money, and so therefore, the wealthy people should be the ones who choose how that money is to be used to help improve society. This was his main idea in The Gospel of Wealth that he wrote in 1901. Okay, there are other things to discuss when it comes to industrialization, but we'll get into those in another video. Instead, I'm going to leave you with a practice question today, which is evaluate the extent to which the Gilded Age economy fostered change in the United States in the period from 1870 to 1900. Pause the video, take a second or a minute to think through what your response would be to that. What would be your context? What would be your thesis? And what would be your evidence? Hope you guys have a great rest of your day and enjoy your studying.